Good morning, students. Welcome again. Today we will start with Political Science, Chapter 3, Electoral Politics, Part 3. In the previous class, we discussed about electoral constituencies, reserved constituencies, and voters list. Today we will learn about nomination of candidates, election campaign, polling and counting of votes. With no further ado, let's start today's class. The first subtopic is explaining about nomination of candidates. Who can nominate himself or herself as a candidate? Anyone who can be a voter can also become a candidate in elections. And anyone can do so, just that he or she should be above 25 years of age. There is no minimum educational qualification required. Now you may ask, why? Because all the other jobs, there are certain educational qualification is required. But why not in politics? Why there is no minimum education qualification in politics? Educational qualifications are not relevant to all kinds of job. For example, the relevant qualification for selection to the Indian cricket team is not the attainment of educational degrees, but the ability to play cricket well. Similarly, the relevant qualification for being an MLA or MP is the ability to understand people's concerns, problems, and to represent their interest. Whether they can do so or not is examined by lakhs of examiners, their voters, after every 5 years. India is a country where majority of population were not qualified enough. If we put a bar on minimum education qualification, that would actually deprive a good chunk of our population from participating in election. Besides that, as we learned in our previous class, that in a democracy, the leader is the choice of the people. So here, we cannot give power to someone with better education or wealth or age or anything. It has to be people's choice. So if the people living in India really think that they want to give more weightage to educational qualification, they can do so. They can do so by voting for the person who have better educational qualification. So it is basically left up to the people to decide how much weightage do they want to give to educational qualification for their representatives. So what did the candidates do when he or she want to nominate himself or herself? The first is the candidates need to fill a nomination form. Even in our school election also, if you want to become a candidate in the student council election, first we need to fill the nomination form. Same way, even in the Lok Sabha election also, as well as in the assembly election. The candidate need to give some, the second point is the candidate need to give some money as security deposit. Every candidate has to make a legal declaration like giving full details of his or her educational qualification, details of the assets and liabilities of the candidates, and not only candidates, families, assets and liabilities, not only the candidates' assets and liabilities, but also he or she need to submit his or her family's assets and liabilities also. Then, if any serious criminal case pending against the candidate. So all these details given as the part of the legal declaration is just to help the voters to understand the candidates better, so that the citizens can decide if they want to vote for that candidate or not. So let's move on to the next topic, subtopic, explaining about election campaign. Before 2 weeks of the election, the final list of the candidates is announced. So approximately this 2 weeks period is the election campaigning time. Now, what exactly happens in an election campaign? the candidates gets to directly communicate with the voters. It means during the election campaigning time, the candidates will get an opportunity to communicate directly to the voters. Even in our school student council election, we have the program Meet the Candidate program. In assembly, during our school assembly, we have seen that the candidates addressing the students. Same way, even in our assembly election or the other election also, there is an election campaigning process is there, and through the election campaigning process, the candidates can directly communicate to the voters. The political leaders attend the election meetings wherein their main idea is to attract public on sensitive issues and make it big. In fact, there are political parties starts preparing for elections months before they actually take place. This is also the period when newspapers and television news are full of election related stories and debates. In fact, if you take the example of Mamata Banerjee, who was the CM of West Bengal, rose to prominence after she opposed the land acquisition in Singur in West Bengal for industrialization at the cost of the farmers. In 2011, she pulled off a landslide victory in West Bengal assembly elections. In fact, she was able to defeat the 34-year-old Communist Party of India in West Bengal. Many a times, political parties used slogans before elections which make them really popular. For example, Modified India before Lok Sabha election 2014. Bhrashtajar Mukt Bharat by Aam Aadmi Party. Garibi Hatao by Congress Party during 1971 Lok Sabha elections under Indira Gandhi. Land to the Tiller in the West Bengal Assembly elections held in 1977. So we see that most of these political parties make equal use of slogans, make use of the election campaigns at its best to attract public attention. Now let's move on to the next slide, explaining about what is the model code of conduct. Model code of conduct. It means few do's and don'ts in a election campaigns. According to our election law, party or candidate can conduct campaigns the way they want. Do not bribe or threaten voters. It means as per the model code of conduct, the candidate or the political party, they can conduct campaigns the way they want, but they cannot bribe or threaten the voters. And they cannot influence voters on the base of the caste or religion. And they cannot use government resources, especially vehicles or officials, for election campaigns. They cannot spend more than rupees 25 lakhs for Lok Sabha election campaign and not more than rupees 10 lakh for assembly election campaign. And they cannot take any big policy decision after election announcement. And they cannot lay foundation stone of any big projects after election announcement. So these are the model code of conduct which a candidate and the political parties need to follow. Now, finally, the slide is explaining about the polling and the counting of votes. The final stage of an election is the day when the voters cast or poll their vote. That day is called the election day or else the polling day. The voters names are there in the voters list, they can visit the nearest polling booth to cast their votes. Please note that there are many polling booths within the constituency, but every voter need to visit the nearest constituency where their name is listed. An agent of each candidate is allowed to sit inside the polling booth and ensure that the voting takes place in a smooth way. It is also important that every voter need to carry an identity card which helps the election officials to identify him or her. So inside the polling booth, there is an official to identify the voter and put a mark on the finger and allow them to cast vote. Then there are electronic voting machines. So here in the next slide, you can see the image of the electronic voting machine. So initially, to record our votes, to cast our votes, we used the ballot box, but currently we are using the EVM, electronic voting machines, to record the vote. All that voter needs to do is press the button against the name of the candidate for whom he or she wants to vote. We had given our vote and expressed our choice. But how do we know that who wins and how? So all sealed EVMs from a constituencies are brought to a secured place. In the secured place, it will open and the number of votes casted for each candidate is counted. Obviously, the one with maximum number of vote wins. Mass media report this event within few hours of counting, and all the results are declared, and after the election declaration, it becomes clear that who will form the next government. A very important point to remember is that the counting of votes takes place in the same day around the same time in all the constituencies in a general election. This is how we decide who wins an election. Now let's have a quick recap of today's class. Today we started discussing from the heading nomination of candidates. Anyone who can be a voter can also become a candidate in elections. The candidate should be a minimum of 25 years of age. Every person who wish to contest an election has to fill a nomination form and needs to give some money as security deposit. The candidate has to make legal declaration giving full details of serious criminal cases pending against the candidate, then details of the assets and liabilities of the candidates and his or her family, and educational qualifications of the candidate. This information is made available to the public so that voters can make their decision on the basis of the information provided by the candidates. Then we learned about election campaign. The election campaigns are conducted to make a free and open discussion about who is a better representative and in turn which party will make a better government. In India, election campaigns take place for a 2-week period between the announcement of the final list of candidates and the date of polling. During this period, the candidates contact their voters, political leaders, and address election meetings, and political parties mobilize their supporters. And then we discussed about some of the successful slogans given by different political parties in various elections, like Save Democracy, Land to the Tiller, Protect the Self-Respect of the Telugus. So like this, we discussed about few of the prominent slogans. According to India's election law, no party or candidate can bribe or threaten voters. Appeal to them in the name of caste or religion is not possible. Using government resource for election campaigning is not possible. To spend more than 25 lakhs in a constituency for a Lok Sabha election, or 10 lakh in a constituency in an assembly election. So all these minimum in a Lok Sabha election, we can spend, candidates can spend only 25 lakhs, and in an assembly election, candidate can spend only 10 lakhs. So these all we discussed under the heading Model Code of Conduct. Then we learned that if any political parties does so, their election can be rejected by the court. In addition to the laws, all the political parties in our country have agreed to a model code of conduct for election campaigns. So according to the specific model code of conduct, the party or candidate cannot use any place of worship for election propaganda, cannot use government vehicles or aircraft and other officials for elections. And once elections are announced, ministers shall not lay any foundation stones of any projects and taken any big policy decisions or make any promises or providing public facilities. Then finally, we learned about polling and counting of votes. The day when the voters cast or poll their vote is called the election day. And we learned about how the voting is done. The voting is done in a manner like every person whose name is on the voters list can go to a nearby polling booth. And once the voters go inside the polling booth, the election officials identify her and put a mark on her finger and allow her to him or her to cast their vote. And then we learned that an agent of each candidate is allowed to sit inside the polling booth and ensure that the voting takes place in a free and fair manner. And then we learned about the ballot box and the electronic voting machine. Ballot box, initially we used the ballot box to cast our votes. Currently we are using EVM, electronic voting machine. So ballot box, so a ballot paper means initially before the electronic voting machine, we cast our vote, the candidate's name, their symbols, everything was there in a ballot paper. A ballot paper is a sheet of paper on which the names of the contesting candidates along with the party names and symbols are listed. In the previous year, our school student council election also conducted in the same way. We used a ballot box, and each student, they cast their vote according as per the ballot paper. They cast their candidate's name, whom they want to prefer as the candidate. They cast their vote next to the candidate's name and next to their symbol. So this ballot paper we used earlier. Nowadays we are using the electronic voting machines to record the votes. The machine shows the names of the candidates and the party symbols. Then here hope we can see that the machine shows the names of the candidates and the party symbols. The voters has to just press the button against the name of the candidate she wants to give her vote to. And once the polling is over, all the EVMs are sealed and taken to a secured place. A few days later, all the EVMs are opened and the votes secured by each candidate are counted. The candidate who secures the highest number of votes from a constituency is declared as elected. So by this we concluded the third part of the chapter Electoral Politics. Thank you, students. Have a good day.